Hello, I'm Emily Keegan, and I'm here to talk about the documentation of queer history in New Jersey. So generally the public is aware about the large queer movements like in New York City or San Francisco, but New Jersey has a rich queer history of its own. Generally, it's been at the front of the fight for queer rights. New Jersey repealed anti-sodomy laws in 1978, while the U.S. Supreme Court repealed or nullified all of them in 2003. And this was from the LGBTQ community's complicated relationship with New Jersey by Prager. Newark specifically has a very rich queer history, which is often overlooked and not documented, and the lack of documentation of the queer history of Newark and New Jersey as a whole demonstrates how queer history is ignored, but when it's celebrated, it shows how it can significantly benefit queer youth. The queer history of Newark is generally not recorded because of the marginalization of sexuality and race. This comes from a community's response to the problem of invisibility. Newark is generally made up of working-class African Americans, and this is due to Newark being often an end location for the Underground Railroad. Because of this, their history isn't often documented since it is not seen as significant by the often white landowners who wrote history. And on top of this, queer people are often pushed to the fringes of society, so the fact that it's queer history of Newark makes it even more likely not to be recorded. However, queer history can be found in the details of work that's come out of Newark. For example, this also comes from Prager. The earliest source that we have for queer history in New Jersey is an arrest record for a 21-year-old in 1885, and who the cops called a make-believe masculine. So this just shows how queer history might not be physically written in a book, but can be shown subtly throughout other texts, and how, even though it might not be visibly there, it definitely is always there. Queer history survived under the surface in Newark. There was queer outlets such as Club Zanzibar, and then events such as butch fashion shows. And also many people went into the city to experience queer life there. Of course, there's the popular Stonewall Inn, which there's a picture on this scrapbook of. That picture is from 1969. And this is something that at least me and my queer friends still do. We often go in the city because there are just a lot more outward queer events there. That does not mean that there isn't much queer history in New Jersey, especially because a lot of people who participated in the movements within New York were queer people from New Jersey. And a lot of those movements were fronted by a lot of white queer people, making them more likely and more documented than movements of African American queer people, such as in Newark. Queer history might have not always been documented, but it definitely is visible. And this is very clearly demonstrated after the murder of Sakia Gunn, where at her funeral, about 2,500 people showed up, which is a very significant amount of people, just showing how tight-knit the queer community is and how willing they are to stand up for people within their community. And in the scrapbook, there is a photo of her memorial, which is along a highway in Newark, and it is a photo of her multiple times over, and the placement of it being there is very significant because it forces drivers to see her, it forces drivers to see a queer woman, force her to be there in society where she should be allowed to thrive. And this just demonstrates the importance of having queer people in society and how they should be visible within the history of where they're located. The lack of documentation can create a lot of issues for queer youth since they have nothing to look for to make them feel validated, so they often feel alone. And if you have no support system, you have a family that is not okay with being queer, it can become very dangerous and you have no outlet, leading to potentially disastrous outcomes. Therefore, having something to look back to in your area is very important. And because of this, of people not being able to find the history around them in New Jersey, like I said, it made them more likely to go other places, such as the city. Notably, Marsha P. Johnson was from New Jersey and left to New York and is monumental in the Stonewall riots. Knowing this information can really help queer youth feel comfortable where they are. And projects like the Newark Oral History Archive can be really helpful with that because it documents queer history in a city where queer history isn't generally talked about. And because of the AIDS epidemic where so many people passed, unfortunately, there's just so many gaps in knowledge that has not been passed down to queer youth. Therefore, things like this are very helpful. There are other projects like Queering the Map that is very helpful. This was very helpful for me specifically because I live in a more rural area where it's like not much populated, and the people that are there are generally very conservative, making me feel very isolated and alone in my sexuality and my journey. But having Queering the Map, I was able to look around my area and see stories of people that are just like me, and it really makes you feel not alone, and it can be very helpful for someone who is very mentally ill because of the lack of support they're receiving. So having projects like this and having them be well known is very, very important, because when a queer person is able to recognize that they are seen and important, it allows them to live life comfortably. And currently this is so significant because of the erasure of the LGBTQ plus community in our country right now. Seen on the National Park State website, they erased the T out of LGBT, which is for the Stonewall Monument, which is absurd because Marsha P. Johnson, who fronted the movement, is a trans woman herself. So it's really absurd and confusing, and going back now, they only mention lesbian and gay people as fronting the movement and being a part of the movement. So trans people are completely erased. And this just makes people feel unlegitimized and can further push people into a darker place. So we know that it's important for these projects to be known by queer youth. However, it's not always easy to get them there. Personally, I didn't know about either of these projects until college, but things like Queering the Map would have been very helpful for me when I was young. Therefore, I think there needs to be a larger push for projects like these to be, well, one, created, and two, through social media where most queer youth are. Therefore, certain social media sites for these projects to, I guess, show what they're about and see who would be interested, and having people be able to write in their own experiences, because a lot of queer history is ground up since it's all marginalized people that are speaking about their experiences. It's hard to find in the so-called regular history books that you find anywhere. Therefore, it's important to get as much information as possible from queer people of New Jersey, and then be able to create a wider map of queer history in New Jersey and where there have been historical queer gathering sites and how movements have spread and who spread them, and just to connect queer people all throughout New Jersey and make people not feel alone. And yeah, that is all. Thank you.